All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to grant writing for JLSD, kind of grant writing 101. I'm Shauna Sliwkanich. I am currently a sustaining member, but I've been past president of JLSD, and I am currently an executive director at a local nonprofit. And part of my responsibilities are writing grant applications. And I will pass it over to Sally Johnson to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sally Johnson. I currently serve on nominating, so I'm always going to put a plug in for applying for leadership as you see opportunities open. We just had some more SOIs open this week, so think about it. Talk to me if you have questions. I'm here to help present with Shauna. In my non-league life, I am a grant writer for large public works infrastructure projects. So I spend a lot of time thinking about funding all day, every day.
And tonight we'll be sharing what are some necessary steps when you start thinking about and applying for grants. So we are happy to have you here tonight. So grant applications they can be a very time-consuming process, but once you have gathered the questions you'll need answered, along with most of your written content and supporting documents, it makes each subsequent application much easier. So there are a number of steps that you'll need to think about as you're preparing, and we have them on the slide here. And Sally and I together will walk you through the steps. So before you take the time to research grants, it's important to assess your organization's goals and specific needs, making sure that they're mission aligned. So for JLSD specifically, you might want to review and understand our strategic plan, and then the annual plan that the EMT has put together that helps guide what you want to accomplish by the end of the league year. I think a few of you are in community council, so you should know your goals for the year. And I've heard that you've discussed projects. You've talked to your partners for ideas on potential projects. And so knowing the food focus area is food insecurity, you might have projects in mind, such as a community garden or further projects with the diaper bank and period pantry. So altogether, with the understanding of your goals, you'll be able to assess the areas where additional funding would be beneficial, and that would align to those needs with the potential grant opportunities. When you start the process, you'll need to figure out what you know. So what is your idea or project? Why is it needed? Why is it unique? Why it is important that your organization conducts the project? Who is it going to affect? Who in the community will it benefit? Where and when it will take place? Who's going to implement it? What are the experts? Who are they? And what value do they add? You'll also need to know what the total cost of the project is and what money from grants that you will need to cover the project. And then a lot of times grants will ask what other funding you have to round out the budget necessary. And Sally, if you have any other ideas as we're going through the slides, feel free to interject. Yeah. So what you do not know might only start to become clearer once you start reviewing the grant applications. So you'll come across what information about your project might be missing, what questions you still have. So you might also start to think about the time you might need to put into creating a grant application versus the likelihood of the grant or the amount of grant money you'll get. So balancing the time needed to gather everything versus the effort required, and determine whether or not the grant that you're looking for is worth it or you're evaluating. Over to Sally.
Yep. Hey. So once you have a sense of your kind of what you're looking for, right, what you need and all that, you should be researching your grant opportunities. So there's a number of sources that you can use, another number of resources you can use to identify potential funding opportunities for nonprofits. These include government agencies, so state and federal agencies, private foundations, corporations, community organizations. It's really important that you when you research these grants, that you're really looking for opportunities that align with your organization's mission and objectives, as well as the goals of your specific project, the thing you're looking for funding for. We're going to talk really about the first two listed here, the government agencies and private foundations. But a lot of people, their companies we know will offer donation matching, or we'll have a workplace giving program. So I know like my company offers grants for nonprofits who work in our industry, and we have a foundation through our company that does that. So keep an eye out for those sorts of things, or if your friends' firms do that. And then community organizations are organizations like JLSD, or other kinds of groups that provide funding for various community improvement projects. So they kind of can serve as a go-between for a funding entity and an organization that's looking for funding. Next. For government grants, there's two main places to research the funding opportunities. If you're looking for state grants, grants.ca.gov has all of the funding that the state offers through its agency. So every single program that there's funding for in various budgets and bond measures, and as things come up, anything administered by a state agency. Federal grants are posted to grants.gov. You'll see that the state website has been updated recently, and so it's a lot more user-friendly than the federal website, which is the one on the right. But both of these sites are searchable by applicant type and topic area. So you'll see in the screenshot on the right, it says, I'm a nonprofit looking for funding in these areas. I selected disadvantaged communities, food and nutrition, health and human services. You can put in some timelines. So is it something that's going to close in the near term, or is it longer term? Is it not open right now? That sort of thing. The government grants often require a long lead time. So when you do government grants, you really need to factor in the lead time. So that's the time from when you submit the application to when you can actually implement your project. There's a lot of times limits on when you can start spending that grant money or things that can be reimbursed. Government grants are also can create some challenges in that most of them or several of them are reimbursement-based grants. So you have to be able to spend the money and wait to get paid back once you spend that money. Although Governor Newsom just signed a law that will provide for NGOs 25% of funding as advanced funding. So you'll get that straight up in advance to help you with the cash flow, because cash flow is one of the biggest things that we hear about from our NGOs and our underserved communities who are getting government grants. Other things to pay attention to are funding match requirements. That's money that's not coming from the state or not coming from the federal government. You'll need to find a way to pay for the remainder of the costs. Another thing to be aware of is these opportunities can have more stringent requirements than private grants. So really understanding those requirements before you apply is important. Winning the grant's only the first step to a successful grant. You also have to administer it and oftentimes pass an audit at the end. So just some things to keep in mind. They often provide a lot larger buckets of money you can draw from than a private grant, but it comes with additional strings. So it's a lot of weighing that effort versus reward. Next, yeah.
So I will be talking about private grants. So a lot of these are through foundations, and like Sally had mentioned, the government grants come with a lot more restrictions and are more time intensive. If you're looking for private grants, sometimes they are have easier applications, less requirements after the grant has been dispersed. And so that is something to take into consideration. So to find these private grants, it is a lot of searching. So you can decide to pay for access. Grant Watch is one that you can pay for access. I know that there was one through that AJLI used to pay for leagues, but they don't do that. Candid has a foundation directory online that you can pay for, but there is also free access. And these are, it is very difficult. They make it very difficult to get the free access, but I do have instructions to be able to access it for free through the Jacobs Center neighborhood. So if you do have the time and want to check it out, you can go do that. We'll pass along the slide so you can go step by step. But other resource, I just Google. So I know my focus area. I know my project. You can type in foundations, San Diego County, foundations in the city you're in, or you can Google grants in food insecurity, grants in grants for community gardens. So I do use Google a lot just because I know the specifics of my my projects. JLSD last year submitted quite a few grants for the diaper bank and period pantry, and they did set up a grant tracking spreadsheet. So you'll get the link to this, but it does have an extensive list of potential foundations to apply to, as well as what has been applied to, what grants have been received, or kind of notes on what they said. And so that is a really great resource for JLSD. Let's see here. There's also the grant writing folder. That is a Google Doc. And so that includes many resources such as logos and letterhead that you'll need, letters of support from other organizations. That folder includes grant applications that have already been written for JLSD. And so they have a lot of the language about JLSD as an organization, our history, leadership, the projects that we do. And so when you're getting started, I would actually go straight to using those two resources, the grant tracking spreadsheet and grant writing folder, to get caught up on what's been done and really the resources that you already have at your fingertips. Let's see here. Back to Sally.
So every grant that is out there has some form of guidelines. Sometimes the guidelines are a separate document from the application forms, and sometimes it's part of the application forms. So you want to make sure that when you identify a grant you're interested in pursuing or exploring more, that you get all the information for that grant and understand it. The guidelines, I treat them as like my roadmap and my Bible for preparing an application. Some funding entities will, if you veer off the guidelines or the instructions in any way, you're disqualified. So that's super duper important to really pay attention to what those guidelines say. Don't just skim them, read through it, print it out, underline it. If you're one of those people that helps you, that's usually what I do. When you've identified these opportunities and you're reviewing the guidelines, you pay attention to those eligibility criteria, pay attention to the funding priorities that will help you understand if your project is a good match, or if you need to make some tweaks to your project to better match those priorities. That's always something that we like to look into. Any sort of requirements for the applications, that helps you understand what you need to gather in advance. The deadlines, don't miss a grant deadline. That's just don't do it. And any restrictions. So those are restrictions on how the money can be spent, or any timelines you need to be aware of. In a grant application, answer every question. If the question is not applicable, state not applicable, and a very, one sentence, not applicable because XYZ. But don't leave anything blank, so that your funder understands that you didn't miss the question. It just doesn't apply. Next. Once you find the,
did it move forward?
No. Once you find an opportunity that you're interested in, I'm still seeing the previous slide. Yeah. Once you find an opportunity that you're interested in, you'll want to assess the opportunity to see if it's really worth going after. It takes a lot of energy to apply for grants. It doesn't have to be hard, but it takes thought, right? You want to be thoughtful about which ones you pursue, because you don't want to spend your efforts on something that's not going to be a good fit for you. So these are just questions that I like to ask myself or my clients when I'm looking at an opportunity. A lot of times my client sends me an email, says, we heard about this thing. Should we pursue it? And I'll say, are we eligible to apply? Basic question, but really important because sometimes you're not. Is our project listed as eligible? A lot of times they'll list out what types of projects are fundable or projects that have been funded in the past. If they have that, check to see if your project matches that sort of activity. Do the grant timelines align with your project schedule? Like I mentioned earlier, for government grants, those processes are slow as molasses. So if you need to get your project done in the next 6 months, a government grant might not be the best fit for you. On the other hand, if you have a long lead time, great. A lot of grants will say this work needs to be completed by X, Y, and Z date, or you can't start construction until such and such a date. So knowing that is really helpful. If your project schedule is flexible, then usually you don't have to worry about timelines. But if you have a strict project schedule, this is super important. It's really important to understand which elements of your project can be funded by the grant. So will it pay for the planning work that you're doing? Will it pay for any permits that you might need? Like a community garden may need to get permits. They may need to get some sort of planning documents completed. There may be a lot of coordination involved with your stakeholders and your community members. How much of that can be funded by the grant, or does the grant only buy things or like pay for capital improvements? I like to look then at how many priorities of the grant does my project meet, because the more priorities, usually the stronger your project. Although just meeting one is typically sufficient unless the guidance says otherwise. If they offer like a scoring matrix, so I work in government grants, so the government grants will have guidance on scoring in most cases. Then, I like to kind of go through and see, are there any scoring categories where I know I can't get points because my project isn't that kind of a project or wouldn't do that thing. So kind of think about what you might be able to score. And if that's low, not worth it, right? And then the final thing that oftentimes gets forgotten is, what have you committed to after you've been awarded? Do you have the capacity to manage the grant itself, not just win the grant? So like I said, just understanding kind of what you're getting yourself into is pretty important. Once you have kind of come through this series of questions, you're like, you know what? I feel pretty good about how well we're fit. We know we're eligible. We think it can fund what we're looking for. We can make up the rest in other ways. We think we can go ahead and manage this grant. We've got the capacity. Then we move into the proposal writing. So this is a list of a lot of common components of a proposal. So oftentimes there's a cover page or a letter that you write. There's an executive summary or abstract that's highlighting, what is the project going to do? What is the benefit it's going to provide? Why is it needed? That sort of thing. Very the key takeaways, right? There's usually a section where you talk about the organizational history. It's often where I'd also stick in capacity to manage a grant if it's something that seems a little complicated. Your statement of problem or need, your program description and project design. That's why do we need the funding? What are we going to do with the funding? For these two, I like to try to use keywords that I've seen in the guidance document. I think, you want to trigger, oh yes, this is doing this. This is addressing this specific need. So make sure you're trying to mirror the language as best, where appropriate, mirror the language in the guidance documents. Goals and objectives, evaluation methods, systems for tracking. So that's, how are you determining how successful you are? Are you achieving the things that you said this project was going to achieve? Schedule, any sort of sustainability plan like O&M, maintenance, post application or post implementation of your project, your budget, and then any sort of appendices. Page numbers, sometimes there's a page limit, so just keep that in mind. If there are page limits and you have appendices, you'll want to make sure you know whether appendices count towards your page limit or not, because that's a real bummer to get booted from consideration because you went over by 5 pages. One thing to note as well that's not on this slide is depending on the funding opportunity, sometimes they'll start off with a letter of interest, which is typically, going to be your cover page. It's going to be the first couple of bullets, but like shorter a lot of times, or sort of a preliminary proposal. And then if they like what you say there, then they'll request a full application. And that's often where you'll get into the nitty-gritty details of your schedule and your budget and like, how are you going to implement it? So understanding again in the guidelines, that process should be hopefully clear in the guidelines, that sometimes it's a two-step process. A couple elements of success. Answer the question first and then expand on your answer. So don't make anybody hunt for the answer. Start with, where possible, start with something like, yes, the project will, whatever the question is asking, or no, the project will not, displace a bunch of people from their houses, right? Whatever the question is, answer it in your first sentence, and then you can explain why that's true, why that yes or no answer is true, right? So kind of start with that answer, then expand on it. You'll want to make it like kind of tell this clear story. That's really about the why are we doing this? What is that need? How we're able to serve that need or address that need with this project, and how all of this aligns with the priorities of the program, the funding program. So you want to be like very clear in tying all that kind of together, make it a nice little package there. A lot of funding entities want confidence that your project will be able to be completed on time, on budget, as described, and that you can successfully deliver those benefits that you're claiming. So if you have experience doing this, you've done a pilot program where you maybe did some healthy food education in a school for one school and you're trying to expand it, then say, hey, we had this successful pilot project, we were looking to expand it, here's how the pilot project went, we know that we can do this. So that's kind of what you're trying to demonstrate. You want to make sure that your budgets and your schedules are reasonable for what you've said, et cetera. Consistency is key. So I'm always looking for consistency. So again, that's part of building that confidence for the funding entity. And then make sure that you are tailoring those responses to the priorities. So it can be easy to get caught up in, this is such a great project, it really deserves funding, which is true, but tie it back into those grant priorities. Don't forget to make sure that they also understand how it relates to what they're trying to achieve as a funding entity, right? So they have their goals, we're trying to help them address their goals by doing projects that align with their priorities.
So we have, Sally just went through developing your grant proposal. Here are some links. I've linked a writing template, and I wanted to give you an example of one of the foundations, one foundation's grant guidelines. And like Sally said, there are some very specific requirements that you need to do to meet their own checklist. And so if mailing, provide one original set of narrative and supporting documents, do not provide double-sided copies. And so each funder will have a very specific list that they want you to meet. So be very diligent in following all of the guidelines so that you're not automatically dismissed. Here are, so in member essentials, JLSD member essentials, there is a grant management system. And so I have a screenshot of the group share here. So this will include financials, access to the Google Drive that I showed you earlier, access to the grant tracking spreadsheet, and also other grant resources and documents that you'll need. I am not sure which leader has access to the group share and who they will share the group share, but I think Alice, is this something they can reach out to you to get access to? I'm assuming.
We can hope.
Okay.
Yes, they can come to me and I can figure it out.
Okay, sounds good. I also screenshotted a grant readiness checklist, and it's just a lot of the additional details that Sally already addressed, but more specific organizational background questions, tax documents, and financial information. They often want to know the governance of the organization, the personnel details on who will be working on this project. So there's a link to this grant readiness checklist that you can download. Another aspect that we haven't touched on is the importance of establishing relationships with potential funders, because if they know you, if they see that your organization is visible, it could enhance your chances of receiving the grant. And so to build these relationships, you can attend networking events, conferences, workshops, to your nonprofit's focus area. You can engage with funders through social media or by attending their information sessions. So a lot of times when funders announce a grant application window, and it's usually for a specific focus area, they will offer 1 or 2 information sessions that you can attend. So I do highly encourage attending, not only to get the information from them. This information can help you make a decision whether or not you really qualify, but it also puts your name out there, your organization's name out there. So there is familiarity, and they'll know that you're serious about the applications. So if you cultivate these relationships over time, not only do you get a better understanding of their priorities, but they will also get to know you and understand your priorities. So when you're submitting the application, we already spoke about this a few times, but definitely follow the guidelines provided by the funder and submit it within the specified deadline. Keep a copy of the submitted application records. Have an idea of when they're going to be announcing who will receive the grant. Sometimes you won't always get the letter or an answer. So I would encourage you to reach out to them if you haven't heard from them in the timeline that they had already provided. If your grant application is successful, that would be amazing. The funding organization may require periodic progress reports or final evaluation of your funded project. And you'll know this ahead of time. So usually when you're going through a grant application, they will let you know what they require, whether or not they require a 6-month check-in or when the project's done. But you want to make sure that you have these dates and deadlines for reporting in your calendar, that you provide accurate and timely reports so that you continue to maintain a positive relationship with the funder. A lot of times, funding organizations will allow you to apply to grants. Even if you received a grant, you are able to apply again in the next year or 2. I'm not sure if this is the same for government grants, but for private grants. And so grant requirements and follow-up responsibilities should be tracked in the spreadsheet along with finding the grant spreadsheet. Let's see here. For cultivating long-term relationships, even if you don't receive a particular grant, maintaining the relationship with the funders by expressing gratitude for the consideration is important, and keeping them informed about your organization's progress or pivots. Building lasting relationships can open doors for future funding opportunities. So definitely maintain that relationship long-term. And most grants I've seen, they highly encourage you to apply it again, even if your first application is rejected. And so sending them a thank you for their time and keeping an eye on when they will often let you know when the next time is you can apply. So they'll let you know if you need to give them a year or if you need to give yourself a year before the next application. But I encourage you to keep applying. The grant application process is always open to continuous improvement. Whether you're successful or not, if you get a rejection, you can always evaluate your strengths and weaknesses to improve future applications. We encourage you to seek feedback from funders. So if you are rejected, you can send a nice email asking for the reasons why you might have been rejected. It could, they might be able to give you ideas for how to make your application stronger the next time around. And so don't hesitate to reach out to them to gain insights and refine your approach. Questions?
We have one from Lucy Miller to start us off. I'll let you say your question because I kind of didn't understand it. Sorry, Lucy. I think
Oh, that's okay.
yeah, perfect. There you go. Okay, great.
Just depending on the grants that you're looking for specifically, ideally, if you're finding the right fit, there wouldn't be too many NAs that
Correct.
you have to deal with.
Yeah,
assuming.
yeah, correct. Sometimes it'll be like a question, will your project have a negative effect in such and such a way? In which case, like, you're like, no, it wouldn't do this. And sometimes there's like a set of questions. If your project is one of the eligible types of projects, then maybe there's a question that's specific to a different type of eligible project. So maybe in the case of what we might go for, perhaps there's a grant that pays for community gardens, but also ag, like a larger ag operation, agricultural stuff. And so if there's an ag specific thing, that wouldn't apply because, you know, maybe it only applies to not an NGO, or it applies to a different scale project. So you're right. In general, you don't want to have a lot of not applicable. So in the case that you do have not applicable responses, like, you just want to acknowledge it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
And Sally, you had written something in the chat. Can you please explain that for us?
Oh, yeah. So I was talking to a client this morning, and she told me they just did a groundbreaking on one of her projects that we had gotten them some grant funding for. So they had the funding entity came down for the opening, because the groundbreaking, because that was a grant requirement that we let them come. And she was showing this person around and was showing them a couple of her other projects. And because of it, these are large, massive infrastructure projects. So we're talking, you know, tens of millions of dollar projects. We had initially applied for 5 million in a grant because that's what we were told was the maximum amount. She showed this guy around and explained the project, and he's like, well, have you applied for that funding? We said, yes, we did. And he said, you know, I think we could give you $20 million. And we had applied for 5. So who knows if it'll pan out the way that we're hoping, but it was all because this is somebody who has been really consistent with maintaining and building those relationships with this entity, and then really took the time to make sure that the right people were talking to them, made sure that they really understood what was going on, and then also showed them what was going on. And so, you know, it's little things like that. When Shauna said relationships can open those doors and open opportunities you don't know exist, it's totally true. And this has happened on more than one occasion. So those relationships are crucial.